join us once Shalise checks attendance, and then they can just jump in wherever we're at. So welcome everybody for coming. This is a presentation in partnership with the MHTTC, the Mental Health Technology Transfer Center Network. You guys have a long name, Erin.
I know.
So welcome everybody. My name is Tiana McCall. I am the USBE's School Social Work / School-Based Mental Health Specialist. And then we also have Ashley Lauer here with the USBE and Shalise Oldroyd. So we are so excited to offer this webinar on selecting and implementing mental health curriculum in schools. We'll go ahead and jump in. I want to introduce our presenter. This is Erin. Is it Briley?
It is.
Okay. Erin Briley is the school, sorry, I'm getting my notes up, is the school mental health coordinator for the Mountain Plains Mental Health Technology Transfer Center Network, MHTTC, as well as a technical assistant associate for WICHE's Behavioral Health.
Yeah.
WICHE, is that how you say it? Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. The Behavioral Health Program. Ms. Briley has over 20 years of experience working in the districts in California, Hawaii, and Colorado. Am I still there? My Zoom just...
You're coming in and out for me.
Zoom is saying quit unexpectedly.
I hear you now.
Okay, I'm going to keep going. She has also served temporarily as a special education as well as a state level school-based behavioral health program administrator, as well as trained and supervised paraprofessionals providing individualized supports to children with special needs. She has extensive experience with psychoeducational evaluations, classroom and individual behavioral management, conducting FBAs, functional behavioral assessments, and creating behavioral support plans, special education legal mandates, and rights related to IDEA and Section 504, as well as learning needs and accommodations to support. Erin earned her bachelor's in human development and family studies at Colorado State University, her master's in counseling / school psychology with a certificate in ABA, Applied Behavioral Analysis, at California State University, Los Angeles. And she's currently working on her PhD in clinical psychology. She's also a nationally certified school psychologist. So we are so excited to have Erin here with us and to share her wealth of knowledge and expertise with all of us. So I will turn the time over to Erin and she will jump into her presentation.
Thank you, Tiana. I really appreciate the introduction. Let's just go ahead and get straight into it here. Just a few housekeeping items because we like to start off with the fun stuff. If our presentation does end unexpectedly today, we will follow up with you using your registration information. Everyone here has been muted for the presentation portion of today's session. So if you have any questions, please throw it in the chat feature. And I'm hoping maybe Tiana or Ashley, you guys can help me monitor. Okay, perfect. It's kind of hard to double task. Also know that this presentation is being recorded and will be posted on the USBE, Safe and Healthy Schools YouTube channel, and a PDF of the slides will be shared with you and posted on the Safe and Healthy Schools website as a resource. And I was kind of glancing through this earlier, so it looks good so far, but just please make sure that your first and last name is added onto your Zoom log on your little pictures there so we know who you are as you're here today. Okay, and a little bit of a disclaimer here. This presentation was prepared for USBE and MHTTC. So you can go ahead and reproduce and copy, but we just ask that you cite things appropriately if you do so, and not reproduce or distribute this presentation for a fee without expressed written permission from us. So a little bit about MHTTC, because I know that I actually didn't know about MHTTC before coming on here, and it's just such a fabulous resource. The Mountain Plains MHTTC, which stands for the Mental Health Technology Transfer Center, and yes, it is a mouthful, provides training and tech assistance to those serving people with mental health concerns throughout Region 8. And Region 8 represents Colorado, Montana, North Dakota, South Dakota, Utah, and Wyoming. And we belong to our mothership. Our mothership is the Technology Transfer Center, the TTC, and it's comprised of a national network of other regional centers like ourselves. and we receive, we were working under a cooperative agreement with SAMHSA. The MHTTC does like to use, we like to align our training and actions to support affirming, respectful, and recovery-oriented language in all of our activities, and we recognize the important role that that person first, culturally responsive and inclusive language plays in supporting the mental health and healing of all individuals. So we encourage you to visit our National Coordinating Office program website to learn more if you would like. And these are just some of our social media handles. If you care to check us out, we are, you can find us on our, of course, our webpage here. We have a Facebook account, Twitter. We also have a LinkedIn and Insta. It's not on here. So I'm going to have to make sure I update that in the future. For our training today, we're going to be talking about a variety of stages when we're looking at selecting a school mental health curriculum that's appropriate to meet our individual needs at our school and/or district level. And so that's going to include the assessment of needs stage, building capacity, planning, implementation, and evaluation. So USBE uses the strategic prevention framework to help us understand the best ways to kind of select these types of tools and implement them. And this is based off of the SAMHSA model that's used in the behavioral health toolkit. So it's just sort of a visual representation based off of the stages I was just kind of talking to you about earlier. Okay, so our first stage is the assessment of needs stage. And so essentially, it's basically what's in the soil. How do we begin? What do we do first? So the first thing we want to do is we want to conduct an assessment of our needs. In other words, we want to make sure we're data informed. And so we want to figure out what type of data is helpful and necessary to understand and support the needs of children within our specific community, right? What's the data that we need? And the other thing that we want to make sure is we're gathering data from a variety of sources to make sure that we're having a really good understanding of more of a holistic view of what's going on here. And so the needs assessment essentially is going to help us identify and prioritize unique needs of our school and our district. It's going to help provide information on the impact of problems that we have. It's going to help us identify factors contributing to the identified problems. It's going to ultimately help us to figure out that curriculum that's specific to our unique needs. Some examples of a need assessment are things that you already are familiar with, things like school climate surveys, for example, or school mental health surveys. Those are really good examples of what a need assessment might be. The other thing that we want to do is resource mapping. We want to figure out what resources do we have to work with, right? So first, we want to figure out what are the programs and services that are already provided at each one of our tiers. So if we're thinking about MTSS, or if you guys are familiar with the triangle, everybody knows our triangle, right? Our multi-tiered system of supports. So what programs or services are already provided at each one of those levels? So we want to consider tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3. We want to figure out, do we have adequate staffing for support and implementation of our current services and programs? And later on, we're going to make sure we have that for our proposed services and programs. We want to make sure that staff are prepared and trained to appropriately support. And we want to analyze things such as like specialized skills that are required. So obviously, you can have somebody, you have to make sure that people are trained appropriately, trained to implement assessments, for example, as well as interpret. Those are two separate things. You want to consider things like who's available to do the assessment, the counseling, the educational, and the therapeutic needs. You want to consider the array of supports and the availability of the needed to support these potential supports, right? You want to figure out how details such as like how when services can be accessed, what the eligibility criteria is. Do you have the funds necessary for trainings in addition to the materials? So obviously we have to purchase materials usually, but we want to make sure that our staff receive that training to implement things with ease, right? And sometimes it's more than just a PD. Sometimes it might be a series of PDs. It kind of looks different in different circumstances. So, and the other thing is that you want to look outside of the school as well and figure out, in addition to the resources that we need at the school level, what are the resources needed in the community level? So that's kind of what it looks like when we're considering resource mapping. So what do we have now and what do we need to have? And we're considering materials, interventions, resources, staff, specialized skills, and everything in between. The next step with the assessment of needs is really gathering stakeholders' input. And I know I'm preaching to the choir, right? We understand that collaborating with our parents, community members is extremely helpful in the long haul. Not only does it increase buy-in, which is huge, right? But it also increases your avenue of supports and your ability to coordinate your resources. So why reinvent the wheel when you have a lot of people who might have different things to be able to offer to your school so that we can meet the holistic needs of our students. Some other things that are helpful to do when you are working with your stakeholders is trying to understand what their understanding is and attitude is towards SEL or the mental health curriculums, right? Are there misperceptions, for example, that need to be addressed? I know that hits home for some of you because I know that Utah has done a lot of work in this area with in certain areas with their parent groups. What do we perceive as student-centered strengths and needs specific to our community, right? It's going to be different depending on where you are and where you're working, right? So our needs in Utah might be completely different than what we have here in Denver or even New York City. So it really is unique to our area. And we really want to figure out how are we going to align and integrate the supports that are already out there, and what are our barriers and how are we going to address them? After we gather all this information, it really is helpful to obtain feedback from your community members. Are your findings on track with their perceptions? Is it not on track? Are there elements that require clarification? And if anything, like I said earlier, I know you know this, it really is about buy-in, and this is absolutely critical for part of that process. Any questions so far regarding assessment of needs? Check out this chat box real quick. Okay, I'm going to move on. If you have a question later, that's fine too. Okay, our next stage is building capacity. So better earth, better gardens and gardeners, right? So we want to establish a prevention team. And what that is going to help us do is it's going to bring about a variety of skill sets, knowledge bases, and perspectives related to our preventative efforts. I personally love working with a collaborative team. I've always found it helpful. We all come with our different areas of expertise, right? At different areas of training, we all have something to offer, and together we're able to develop a better view of what to do, where to go, how to interpret things. And so we want to kind of bring that along with us in our journey as we're doing this. And we always want to make sure we're addressing our team's understanding of what our needs are and what the prevention strategies are that we're electing. And we want to figure out, are there ways that we need to improve community awareness and how we're going to do so, as well as clarify goals and shared vision. So this is kind of like the goal of the prevention team. And as you have the prevention team, it is really incredibly helpful to establish clearly defined rules and expectations early on. We know it just makes things move along a lot more clearer, a lot more smoothly if people understand what their expectations are. In terms of assembling our team, I know that we want to have diverse members. Some of the things we want to consider are who are going to be our leads. And leads are things like the team lead, the data lead, the administrative lead, things like that, right? So there's a lot of different pieces that we need to look into. The other thing that we want to do is we want to make sure that we are including teachers that are representative of different grade levels and subject areas, as well as specializations. So we want to make sure we have special education teachers on board and specialists and interventionists, right? So that once again, it's a diverse group of thinkers together. We want to include related service providers. So involving your school psychologist and social worker, speech path, and nurse can be really helpful. Including your support staff can be incredibly helpful, such as your counselors and disciplinarians. And sometimes our security too can be really helpful as well. I know usually we don't have security unless we're at the high school level, but that can be helpful as well. And once again, when we're talking about a prevention team, including those diverse stakeholders, and that's once again with the purpose of not only creating buy-in, but to provide access to resources in a variety of settings outside of the school, right? We want to look at our community partners and we want to create those partnerships. So who are the behavioral health providers that we can partner with? How can our families support us? What do the students have to say about our efforts here, right? And the other thing to keep in mind is we don't always have to have the teams come to convene together. In other words, we don't have to have the school staff always convene with the community members at all times. I know logistically that's not always possible. Let's be honest, right? It doesn't always work. But we want to make sure that even if we're having those two different types of meetings there, the two different types of teams, we're still sharing the information so that we're all on board, right? We know exactly what's being discussed so that we can address misperceptions, so that we can clarify things as needed, so we can operationalize. I'm a behaviorist, right? I'm a big fan of operationalize, making things really clear. That way we don't have any misinterpretations of what needs to happen. Any questions so far related to that second stage? Okay. Are there any specific assessment tools that are recommended within this context? I can talk about some later on. I have some resources for you in terms of guides, implementation guides that can help you along the way. And that will help you out with that piece of things, because I know if you were to just go in there kind of free think and to just dive in there, it makes it really hard. And there are some implementation guides to guide you along that process that will really make things a lot easier. And I'll provide that to you after the training. All right. Our third stage is our planning stage. So now that we've kind of figured out what our needs are, and we've got our preventative team in place to figure out what it is that we need to do to address the prevention, now we need to plan, right? And we want to be strategic in terms of our planning. So the first thing we want to do is prioritize our needs. So by being strategic, we're just being more effective with our time and efforts. And let's be honest, working in the schools was the hardest job I've ever had. It's the most demanding job that I've ever had. And so we really need to make sure that we're being the most effective with our time, right? And we want to make sure that our effectiveness is really centered along what's most appropriate for our specific community. So we want to do things like identify strengths and identify those needs and gaps in our service delivery, as well as prioritize them. Okay, so we're not just bullet listing them, but we have to prioritize what our needs are. So when we're prioritizing our needs, there's two things we want to do. Number one, we want to identify the importance as well as the changeability of things. So in terms of the importance, we want to figure out, do they contribute to our prioritized needs? Are they associated with other behavioral health problems? That essentially is what's going to help you with identifying importance. And you see a little asterisk there next to importance, because that's going to be your preference. If you had to choose between one or the other, the level of importance supersedes changeability. Okay. The next thing you want to do is you want to identify the changeability. So does the program or intervention that you're selecting have the capacity for change, essentially, right? So What resources and interventions are in place or are needed? Is there evidence-based program or intervention available to meet your need? And can the outcomes be expected within a reasonable amount of time? Okay, that makes perfect sense. So when we're identifying these strengths and needs, what's preferred is something that has high importance and high changeability. That would be our preference, right? But if you're having something that's either one or the other, it's high importance and low changeability, or maybe high changeability and low importance, what we're going to go with is high importance. Okay, that's going to go ahead and take precedence there. Okay. All right, so in terms of our curriculum assessment, or excuse me, our curriculum selection, we want to make sure that we have a program and or intervention to address each area priority need. You're going to find perhaps that maybe you find this incredible curriculum, but it's just not hitting maybe two of your specific needs. And so you're going to need to make sure you supplement with something else, because you want to make sure that all of your needs are being addressed. Okay, so does it address your identified priority needs? Do you have the capacity to implement it? Because if you don't, you're going to run into problems. You can have this amazing curriculum that's just absolutely perfect for your school or community, but you need the capacity. You need to make sure that your staff are trained to implement, that you have support persons available. And in fact, that's one of the areas that I'm hearing a lot of my schools that are struggling, or my districts that are struggling. They're like, we need the support people to help us along the way. We just don't have the manpower, right? And that piece is really hard if you don't have the manpower. So it goes beyond budget. So yes, of course you need budget. You need the staffing and the manpower in order to do it. You need the space in order to implement things. You have to look at the logistic of things as well. And finally, will the community support it, right? Because once again, that goes into buy-in, and buy-in is absolutely crucial. Like I said, I know I'm preaching to the choir here. Okay. We also want to make sure that we have a comprehensive approach when considering our strategic planning. So our programming should really be meeting the needs of all of our students requiring different levels of support. So if you go back to MTSS, the multi-tiered systems of support, so if you think about that triangle of support, we want to make sure that the program that we're selecting supports our students at levels 1, level 2, and level 3. Okay, we want it to be comprehensive. Not only that, but we want it to meet the needs of diverse students. We want it to be culturally and linguistically appropriate, right? So it's not just about behavioral health needs or academic needs or whatever, but we want to make sure that we're considering all of these things so that it's the best fit for all of your students. Just a little reminder. Okay, I kind of feel like I know a lot of us know about this continuum of support here, but this is the MTSS. It's like an MTS model that we're talking about, where we're increasing our levels of support as needed. So we can see here at tier 1 at the very bottom of that triangle, those are our universal interventions that are provided to all students. It might be, the classroom management program that the teacher implements for all of our students, or school-wide rules and expectations, or maybe this would be the school-wide, maybe social emotional curriculum that you have selected, right? And then we're kind of moving up as the needs require to address students who are at risk and or high needs, right? So once again, we want to make sure that we're able to provide services for all of our students, whether it be universally based and providing common knowledge for them to more specific needs. The other thing that we want to make sure that we're doing is have a curriculum review process in place. So now we have our prevention team, right? We have our planning team, and now we have our curriculum review team. We want to make sure we have identified who's going to be part of this curriculum review team. Are there teams are already, excuse me, Are there teams already available in your district and or school who do this, and can you jump in with them? Do they have representation across grade levels? Because that's very important, because once again, you want to make sure you have a group of diverse thinkers from different levels of expertise, in addition to teachers from every grade level. So you want to make sure you have your specialists, you want a special education, consider your school psych, social worker, school counselors, disciplinarians, things like that, right? And the holy grail, stakeholder and community input, okay? The other thing, and I'm not familiar with Utah standards and requirements, but you do want to make sure that the curriculum that you're selecting does meet your school or district requirements and specifications. So I know in Colorado, we have social emotional core values that have to be met. And so that's what they use here to help oftentimes to measure whether the curriculum is appropriate for them or not. Okay, in terms of the review process, there are some logistics that is helpful to consider. When you're selecting a curriculum to review, you want to make sure that you've got some stakeholder input and it's in alignment with some of their values, but you want to consider how many curricula are you gonna review, and it's recommended that you review at least 3 to 4 before making your decision, so that you can have a little bit more of an array, determine what's best for you. You want to make sure you have that you are trying to figure out how long do you want to take to select the curriculum. That needs to be decided in advance. How long do you want to give at one time for a curriculum review meeting? That's something that you need to determine. And it really is helpful to have, of course, those hard copy or sample lessons to implement. The selection criteria, it is really helpful to have something a little bit more standard when you're reviewing that criteria, so that you're looking at for the same aspects, the same factors with each curriculum that you're reviewing, so that you're reviewing things from a more unbiased type of approach. And that would really help you out as well. And there are some tools out there for the review process. This is an example of a tool that was used by an elementary school here in Colorado. So I'm not sure if you can see it, but I just want to point out to you that these factors on the left-hand side, it says, how well does this curriculum align with these competencies, standards, and or principles? And what they did is they've taken these Colorado SEL standards, and they just pulled out those SEL standards, and they just tagged on a Likert scale to see how does that curriculum line up with our state standards. And that's just a really nice and simple way of doing things that you might want to consider. So it worked for that elementary school. So you can see some of I won't read every single standard, but you see things like the first standard is utilize knowledge and skills to enhance mental, emotional, and social well-being. So how well does that curriculum do with that based off of the Likert scale? Was it not very well aligned, or was it very well aligned, right? The second standard is exhibiting responsible personal and social behavior that respects self and others in physical activity settings. So you can see there, like I said, I don't need to review every single standard. It's just aligned with the state requirements, and that would just make things a lot more, it would be a lot easier for you to implement if you were to do something like that. I'm going to go to the chat here. Okay, I'm gonna go back to your question later because I need some more time to think about that. Okay. Looking at the implementation stage, otherwise, so now that we have a plan of action, we've collected our data, we've selected our curriculum, how are we going to implement it? So now we've got our implementation stage that we need to go ahead and figure out. Okay. So when we're looking at implementation planning, you can see here throughout every single stage that we're going through, it is so especially pertinent to identify the who's, the what's, the why's, the where's, the how's, right? To really break it down so there are no questions in terms of each stage of the process. Everybody understands exactly what it is that we're doing, why we're doing it, who's doing what, when we're collecting things, when things are due, whatever it might be. So you really want to make sure that you have identified a responsible person for implementing the program, for evaluation, for tracking fidelity, and know that maybe this could be the same person. Maybe someone is completely well-versed in all of these things, then great. But you might need to split that up among different individuals, depending on what your needs are, or even the work demands of what's going on in your school and or district, right? We want to figure out, when we're implementing this curriculum, are we doing it school-wide, or are we doing it at certain grade levels? Who is going to teach the content, right? Is it going to be the teacher as part of their weekly social studies curriculum, or middle schools, maybe it's during the weekly advisory period, or maybe elementary schools, sometimes they have the counselor come in and do a brief presentation. Who's going to do it? So these are some of the things that you need to think about as well. And some of these curriculums really help you specify what it should look like, and they've done a lot of that legwork for you and makes it a lot easier. But nevertheless, these are some of the conversations that you need to have. The other thing is, how are you going to measure the impact or outcomes? When is the data going to be collected? How often is it going to be collected? You definitely want to have baseline data to compare to, right? Because otherwise you really can't figure out whether you're making gains or not, right? Because you really want to make sure that it's a bang for your buck, right? Let's see. The action plan is a really important tool, because what it's going to do is going to help you track all the different pieces and connect everything to your goals and objectives that you've developed, right? That's the final piece of this here, that you have measurable goals and objectives there. And you want to make sure that everything is connected. Here is an example of a training plan. You can see on the left, we have a training plan that's quite simple. And maybe that might meet your needs. Or maybe it might meet your needs right now, right? Because we know that sometimes implementing things at first can be really overwhelming. Making change, especially with our current requirements as it is, right? Adding things in can be very overwhelming. I understand this. I've lived this. I get it. But you can also create a quite detailed plan too, as you see on the right here. So either way, it's important to have a written plan of action like this to help document things, because it provides a visual. It helps people understand who the responsible people are, what the timeline is for program planning, for implementation, for evaluation. In other words, we're really talking about what my favorite word is, right? Operationalization, right? Let's operationalize things. Someone is asking if Ms. B has a tool like this for curriculum review. So I'm hoping our moderators can take a note of that so we can talk about it later. Okay, so let's talk about fidelity. What is fidelity? Fidelity is the faithfulness with which curriculum or program is implemented. So basically, how well is it implemented without compromising the program's core components? That's what fidelity is. So what we want to do is we want to monitor the implementation of the program and the program outcomes, okay? That's what's going to help us understand whether we're meeting the fidelity of the program or not. Now, so this chocolate chip cookie recipe analogy, what is that? So basically, think about it this way. There are specific ingredients and a process that we need to use in order to make chocolate chip cookies, right? If you don't follow it exactly, you're not going to have chocolate chip cookies, or they're going to be just different, right? We know that chocolate chip cookies made with coconut flour it's going to taste different than those made with regular flour. Or we could change the type of sugar. We could change the type of chocolate chips for those people who eat sugar-free chocolate chips. God bless you. But they're going to be modified. They're going to be changed to some extent, right? Know that a lot of the programs that you're going to come across do have their own Fidelity monitoring forms that highlight the program as can and cannot be changed. And that is super helpful, right? Incredibly helpful. Sometimes programs don't. Nevertheless, we have to keep track of that. Okay, so who's going to complete those forms showing that we've made these modifications, right? So we want to have Fidelity tracking forms and tools. We want to consider program-specific forms and identify who's completing these forms. Okay, so talking about the modifications or the program adaptations, right? The adaptations basically means how much and in what ways is the practice changed to meet the local circumstances, right? And sometimes adaptations are needed, okay? And that's okay in certain circumstances. Know that when we identify an adaptation challenge, we really need to think about things in advance. We can't just simply make a change. We have to think about it in advance to determine if it's appropriate or not. So in other words, is it going to change the core component of the evidence-based practice, right? Is it going to change the fidelity of what we're doing or not? So hopefully it's not really changing the fidelity. That's really what we're trying to go with here. So if we, for example, have an adaptation, we've identified a need, we're like, oh, I think we need to modify this a little bit, we need to make an adaptation. But we know that it's going to better fit the age of our students, the culture, the context of our population. It might be completely appropriate and a green light adaptation. Go for it, right? It might be completely appropriate. A yellow light adaptation means take caution, all right? Adaptation should be made with caution so that core components are adhered to and that adaptation does not cause other issues such as time constraints, competition of topics, things like that. So when making yellow light adaptations, it's recommended that you consult more detailed adaptation tools or an expert in the evidence-based practice, such as the model developer, if available, before making that change, right? So maybe you might have somebody in your district that you can consult with as well. Some of our districts are lucky enough to have that type of professional available. A red light adaptation means stop, don't do it. It means that these type of adaptations are going to remove or alter key aspects of the program and result in weakening the effectiveness of the program, okay? So those are the things that you really need to consider. You need to consider the diverse populations that we're working with. We need to figure out, okay, based off of this diversity, does this curriculum need to be changed in any sort of way in order to meet the needs? And if we did that, how would that look like? And is that appropriate? Okay, because if it ultimately changes the integrity of the program, that's not good. All right. So like I know that when you make adaptations, and they are necessary, I've worked in a lot of programs that have had adaptations. Don't worry if you have to make an adaptation, because sometimes they are necessary. I'm just saying, take the time to analyze it beforehand to make sure it's appropriate. You can't just throw something in there. And know that the more adaptations you make, the more you risk messing with the effectiveness of the program, right? Because then you can't make that determination. You can't make that correlation whether outcomes are directly attributed to the program or to the adaptation or what's going on, okay? So really try, if at all possible, to maintain the core components of your program as much as possible. Really try to increase your capacity. And remember, capacity means things like trained faculty, funding for materials, physical spaces to implement things. And so just increase your capacity so we can implement that program as designed. Any adaptations involving additions to the program are considered to be better than removing things. Consult away. Whenever you have a question, whenever you have a concern, consult out with whomever is most appropriate. And make sure that you're kind of thinking about unplanned or unforeseen changes. And I know that you guys had to deal with that when for example, the pandemic came about, like what now, right? You had to think on your feet, and sometimes that's necessary for this type of thing as well. Okay. Here's an example of a program adaptation checklist. I thought it was pretty cool. So the aspects here that they're looking at, I know it's kind of small, but we're looking at things like the content of the sessions, right? Is the content, do we need to deliver adaptations to the content? What about how we're delivering the intervention? We want to consider things like the duration of the intervention. Does that need to be changed? The delivery method, the number of sessions, the length of sessions, the order of sessions, the frequency of sessions, the materials being delivered. So you can see how specific we're getting when we're considering things. To whom is the intervention being delivered? So who's your target population? The number of participants, the characteristics of the students that you're working with. You want to consider things like age, gender, ethnicity, risk level, geography, linguistic needs, cultural needs, right? And then, how are you recruiting? Who's going to participate in these programs at each of these tiers, right? How do you know when you're going to retain these students or when you're going to release them from that particular level of intervention, right? Where? You want to consider things like the setting. Is it going to be delivered in a class? Is it going to be delivered after school? Maybe it's in the interventionist room, the home, community center, whatever, right? But these are some of the things we need to consider. The delivery agent is another thing that we need to look at as well. And I'm reading this off because I just want to make sure that you guys, are hearing it. I know that you have access to this later, but it's a lot of details, right? We want to consider the number of staff required, right? Or does it leave room for volunteers if your district or school is lucky enough to have parent volunteers come in? Because not all of our schools have that luck. I've worked with a lot of Title I schools, and we didn't have that as an option, right? So how nice for you if you do, right? So consider, can you involve them? What type of training would that require if you were to do that, right? What type of training is required for your staff to be proficient at doing that? And not only training, but who can they consult out with if needed, right? So who's going to be like your resident expert, or maybe it's going to be like your team. Maybe you have that team still running that they have to go back to if they have any questions. What are the characteristics of your delivery agents? And once again, you have to also think about the recruitment retention piece of it as well. How are you going to select your delivery agents? Who's going to be your interventionist, right? Like I said, sometimes some schools have it being built in right into the classroom, and the teachers are building it right into, usually it's like health or social studies, or for my older kids, it's like an advisory period. I've had school counselors go into the classroom and deliver things once a week. So it really looks different for each school. So you have to figure out who's going to be the best person to deliver that, as well as how long, right? So anyway, when we're looking at the interventions, these are some of the things that we want to consider. If any adaptations are made for any of this, we need to make sure we're documenting that. And so we want to date that date of the modification, as well as the reason why that modification was made. And so they recommend using 6 categories when considering program modifications. So we've got recipient issues, program provider issues, community issues, setting issues, evaluation issues, sustainability. Kind of all goes back to the list that I just kind of read here. Okay. Any questions so far related to adaptations? Okay, I'm going to keep on moving. I don't see any of your faces right now, so just so you know, I'm speaking to a screen. So if you have a question, you have to let me know in the box here. Okay, so next what we have is our evaluation stage, right? Our harvest season. How well is it doing? Okay, so schools, we're all about data, right? Data informed. We need the data to determine what our needs are. We need our data to determine what curriculum might best meet our needs. We need our data to figure out how specifically we're going to implement things. And now finally, we need our data to figure out how we're going to determine, did it do what it was supposed to do, right? Did it achieve any outcomes? So we want to engage in process evaluations and outcome evaluations. So essentially, what we're looking at is by engaging in like a systematic evaluation, it's really going to help reduce our uncertainties, improve our effectiveness, and facilitate our decision making to improve support. So it does take a lot of time, but I consider it to be a lot of front loading to make our lives easier in the end. And to me, I find that worth it. You know, I'd rather spend some time getting things established in order to have an easier life for all of us in the end. So with the process evaluation, we really want to always make sure we're considering the fidelity and the implementation quality. So was the program implemented with fidelity? Was it implemented the way it was intended to be implemented? And if it was not, why? And this is where we're really talking about those accommodations and program adaptations, right? And like I said, there could be some really legitimate reasons why we want to make sure we're doing those adaptations. Sometimes it's absolutely needed, right? So don't go into it thinking, oh God, I have to, do these adaptations. Sometimes it really is required, but we want to make sure, we want to make sure that that if we make any adjustments, right? If we make those adaptations, that the end result is because we're trying to strengthen the effectiveness of the interventions that we're delivering, right? We also want to consider the resources we need in order to strengthen that effectiveness as well. So we're looking at adaptations, we're looking at the quality of resources, we're looking at barriers to implementation, we're looking at the length of student participation, right? In terms of outcome evaluation, we want to consider things like the direct effects of program implementation. So were these results expected? In other words, a lot of times the curriculums that you guys are going to be reviewing, it's going to be like the intended goal of this curriculum is to A, B, C, and D. That makes things nice and easy. You know exactly what the intention is. And were those results expected? Did they align? And you want to compare those results to your baseline data. So really, and that's the only way you can figure out whether you've made gains or not, or maybe the gains were minimal, and maybe you need to consider adaptations or looking at another curriculum. You want to make sure that you're incorporating program-specific evaluation tools rather than just going off of opinions. And you guys know that. I understand that. But that's going to take away the bias to make sure that we're more objective in our analysis of things, right? Obtaining student feedback can be very helpful as well. Okay. So here is an example of an evaluation tool here. You can see it. You can see here, the program addressed the stated objectives, the present, it was accurate and without bias, the quality, so this is talking about, it looks like it's related to a university, but you can see here that they're measuring the outcomes. So the outcomes align with what was promised, what our goals already were, okay? And as promised, I have some resources here for you, okay? So I know that somebody specific here was talking about some implementation guides. And so these two particular guides, I'm familiar with the first one more. We actually did a training on that. If you did a search on our Mountain Plains MHTTC, you'll probably be able to find that. And if you email me, I have my email address up there. I can help direct that to you. But it really, what it really does is it breaks things down every step of the way. It gives you sample evaluation tools. It gives you sample forms about people to fulfill each role. It just really kind of breaks things down for you. It's really nice and easy. So I think this presentation that I'm doing now, it's great, right? But you're going to walk away like, what now? Okay, so I really encourage you to look at some of these implementation guides to help guide you through that process, okay? We've got some examples of some needs assessments as well. Castle has a resource center. And then of course we have, I'm sure some of you are probably already familiar with the SHAPE system. And the SHAPE system provides some assessment resources. It provides a screening and assessment library as well. And what it does is it really helps districts and schools kind of analyze where they are in the process of implementation, right? And even crisis intervention. Okay, so that's really kind of the whole purpose of the SHAPE system. So now I'm going to turn it over to someone who can help me pull out any questions that might have come up that I missed. Oh, here's
Thanks,
my,
Erin.
You're welcome. That's my contact information if you guys want to contact me. Please feel free.
I think we were able to address all of the questions that popped up as you were presenting. I don't know, Erin, if you got any questions just to you.
I did. And I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to answer this. It's what are the limitations of mental health support in terms of curriculum within schools from a state direction? Meaning, is it only to be within a school as a scope or to speak on family members and examples? I'm having a hard time understanding that question to whomever wrote it. If you could clarify, you can write to me directly. I won't call you out. That would be helpful.
Erin, if they want to, you have the power to unmute them since you know their name.
Okay. Okay, I leave it up to you, person, if you'd like to unmute yourself, or I gave you the power.
And then if anybody,
sure.
Oh, there you go. Go ahead.
There we go. I'll just be super quick about it then. So is the curriculum within the state direction, is the curriculum guiding, is the state direction to guide the curriculum to be only school focused or to include matters of family and relationships of family? Like, you know, when you and your sister argue, this is how you emotionally regulate. Or is it only when you and your classmate argue, this is how you emotionally regulate?
I think that kind of really depends on the needs of your school. It would be my official answer. I don't know if you know, my counterparts have anything to add to that, but I think that's the whole point of it, is to know that we have different perspective, you know, different needs at our districts, but also the trend really is to start reaching out and developing community partnerships. But I think that by helping students understand how to navigate relationships with their peers, they should be able to apply that hopefully in their home settings as well. That would be, I don't know, Ashley, Tiana, do you have anything to add related to that? Or
as far as I'm aware, we don't have any specific guidance on that at this point. Ashley, I don't know if you have anything to add. The same. Yeah, there's no specific guidance on that from the state level as far as we are aware, as far as what kind of language is included in those curriculums. And it might be up to each district to decide.
Yeah, and I know sometimes that flexibility is really nice to have, and at other times having that flexibility can make things a challenge because you have to answer questions like that. And so it really kind of depends on your specific needs, maybe your stakeholder input. But I would think that if you are addressing that type of interaction component between peers, hopefully it should be able to transfer to relationships outside of the school too. And that's the whole purpose really of these type of curriculums, right? We're hoping these skills are going to transfer over to post-secondary life and life outside of school. Sorry, I couldn't provide more information for you, Jay. Anybody else have any questions?
Feel free to throw any questions you have in the chat and we can try to answer those. Meantime, I wanted to give Ashley Lauer a chance to briefly touch on a tool that will be coming out soon, hopefully, that will be in addition to some of this work that Erin talked about that you guys can all engage in, that this tool can hopefully help you in some of that work. So go ahead, Ashley.
Thank you, Tiana, and thank you, Erin, for that wonderful presentation. This has been a tool that has been an ongoing progress or a process, I apologize, for almost 2 years at this point, I guess a year and a half. It is originally was an update to a manual that was specific to behavioral health in schools. We are updating it as a toolkit for behavioral health in schools. It has a very long name, but I will just say that the first part of the title is Utah's Behavioral Health Toolkit. And it really is, it's using the framework that Erin addressed with the assessment of needs and the different stages of building a comprehensive system of support for student behavioral health needs. It really takes a system perspective, and it takes into account collaborative partnerships with those in the community. It provides guidance through each of those stages, as well as some tools in each of those stages. We're hopeful that it will be out late this spring, so it will be something that could be utilized prior to next school year. That's pending any unforeseen barriers that could come into play, but we're hopeful that it will come out in late spring. So hopefully that will be a good tool to help refine the system that you have in place, or build upon and create a system that will best support the needs of your students.
Ashley.
So I went ahead and threw my email in the chat box. If anybody needs to email me at a later date, please feel free.
Thanks so much, Erin.
You're
I did
welcome.
get a message in the chat from David. David, do you mind if I just say your question out loud, or do you want me to contact you separately? Out loud is good. Okay. So David asked, how will the department, I'm assuming USBE, how will USBE support schools and districts in implementing SEL programs? As far as I'm aware, we don't have any I don't know of any specific support that exists right now for that. I know that there is a social emotional learning team here at USBE that is working on some guidance that will be out to districts and schools. They're working on some rebranding. I don't know how else to say that, but rebranding a little bit of SEL and to give some more support in that way. And it's coming soon. I'm not a part of that team, so I don't have very much insight onto that. I just know that others are working on it. Ashley, you might have some more insight in that if you want to speak to that.
Yes, I will add just a little bit more. So we are working on a guidance document, and when that guidance document is released, we will also be discussing, or not discussing, but announcing some we will be announcing office hours as well as a community of practice. So there will be a couple of different opportunities to engage with others who are implementing social emotional learning throughout the state, as well as asking questions, implementation questions. So 2 different opportunities. One will be office hours with USBE on a monthly basis, just to, if there's questions that come up, and then also a community of practice where there can be some more networking opportunities. That release should be coming out, or the document should be coming out within the next couple of months, and so then those office hours and community of practice will start at that time as well.
Thanks, Ashley. All right, thank you guys all for attending. It looks like Erin threw her email in the chat. I also want to put my email and Shalisa's email in there. If you are a DOPL licensed individual who would like a certificate of attendance for your DOPL relicensure, feel free to reach out to me and Shalise, and we can get that certificate over to you if you are interested in that. And watch out for the PDF. Shalise, I don't know if are you planning to post that to the website for review?
I am. So the recording from today will be posted on our Safe and Healthy Schools sub channel for USBE on YouTube. I will send that link to that channel, and I will also send the PDF of this presentation to all who attended today. And that housekeeping page will have the link to where the PDF will also be posted as a resource.
Awesome. Thank you guys for attending, and thank you, Erin, for a wonderful presentation.
Thank you.